Hello, this is Hope Matters, a production of Mount Olive Lutheran Church here in Santa Monica, California. I'm Pastor Shafer, the senior pastor here at Mount Olive, and each week we talk to an interesting person from around the neighborhood, around the country, even around the world about the theme of hope, because we believe that hope matters. Our guest today is a repeat guest, Mount Olive's own Sam LaDue, who is now a second-year student at the Pacific Lutheran Theological Seminary in Berkeley, California. And I thought it might be interesting to our viewers to hear how it's going for Sam. When we first talked to you, Sam, wow, I think you were in your first weeks of seminary when you moved up to Berkeley a year and a half ago. Oh my, the time kind of all crunches together.
I hadn't even moved yet. I had piles of boxes behind me I had strategically hidden in my room.
I see. Okay. Well, good. Well, now you're there. So, tell me how it's going. You're halfway through a second year of seminary, and you know what? So maybe this is a way to start. Now that you've been at this a year and a half, what's been your biggest surprise?
Oh, you know, I think maybe the biggest surprise for me is that the combination of opportunity to dive very deeply into a variety of heavy academic books, meeting the opportunity to build lots of really fun community with a lot of people who are equally interested in diving into some kind of esoteric stuff that your average person on the street is not interested in, has made for an interesting tension where all you want to do is read, but all you want to do is talk. I am an introvert. This is very bizarre. This is a weird place for me to be. But it is, you do have this very strange scenario where you're like desperately excited to get into your research project, but you're also desperately excited to run out the door every 10 minutes and tell people what you just read and get into a conversation about it. So that's probably been the biggest surprise for me, is that my introverted self is suddenly much more interested in like finding out where everybody else is and what they're up to and what they think.
Interesting. Well, the impression I get from talking with you and even seeing your posts on Facebook is that you're enjoying the community part of the seminary.
I am very, very much so, and I think one of the more beautiful aspects of seminary is that it's a really intentional space for building community, but it's also a really beautiful way for us to try out different ways of building community and see, what methods and structures work, what methods and structures don't work. You have the benefit of a group of people who are pretty committed to this, so we're willing to go pretty far in terms of feedback and vulnerability, in terms of building relationship. That's also really beautiful, and I have loved that deeply. Deeply, deeply loved that.
That's nice. That's nice. So this probably is a similar question. What have you liked the most about the experience so far?
Ooh. You know, I thought going in that I would be heavily involved in liturgy, just because obviously that's my background, and enjoying, but maybe kind of annoyed with any kind of formal theology study, in the sense that it's very structured and you're coming from like Socratic method and all these structures. It turns out maybe my favorite thing of this whole entire mix is a combination of moving into completely different religious spaces, and I've ended up becoming this person who's desperately headed down this pathway of interreligious dialogue. So I am constantly like, what can I take over at the Hindu school? What can I take over at the Muslim school? What can I take over at... These are things that I am really, really loving, and then I'm loving pulling that back into liturgical spaces and into theological conversation. We ended up in a really deep conversation, I want to say about 2 weeks ago, in one of our liturgy classes. It ended up being focused on, we were talking about Eucharist, we were just talking about the practice of doing the Eucharistic prayer, but it ended up becoming a conversation about pain and suffering and what that means in the Eucharistic space. And within that space, pulling in other traditions and other traditions' viewpoints on these things, I think sometimes really helps to illuminate who we are as Christians, who we are as Lutherans. So that for me has become probably the biggest surprise and the most fun of it all, is that I'm loving the Christian education piece, but the thing that's really making the Christian education valuable is going into the other and fellow religious spaces and hearing and seeing what their truths are, and then coming back into my space.
Wonderful. Well, you know what I think of that, of course. And so I do not think you can be a pastor in the 21st century and not be involved in interfaith, interreligious work. I mean, it's just, I mean, and and all the studies show that with less people of overt faith, of any faith,
Yes.
those of us that have overt faith have even more reason to work in common.
Yes. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and that's for sure. Now I know that when you first started, they also put you out in a congregation on weekends.
Yes.
And has that continued now as through the
Yes.
time?
It has. It has. It started out primarily digital. I did a little bit for them right around Easter in person, socially distanced, but in person. This term has been primarily in person. It's really been a joy. It's a lot of fun. I think similar to what Mount Olive is probably seeing, this parish is also their 9 a.m. service is a completely. It does not look like a worship service like most Christians might define a worship service. It's built on a reflection model. So basically, either myself or Pastor Dan comes in and we have a reflection we've built that may or may not relate to the lectionary readings for the weekend. A lot of times, more often than not, it doesn't. It probably does more so for me because I'm a little more limited in my time during the week to prepare this stuff. But it will not directly, we won't use a lot of direct Christian language a lot of times, or if we do, we immediately define it as Christian language. And we share a reflection, and then we, as a group, talk about that reflection and talk about what it means for each of us as individuals and how we related or resonated with those conversations. And then our 11 a.m. service looks a lot more like what Mount Olive's 11 a.m. service looks like. But even in this space, it's a different world post-COVID. And we're not even post-COVID, really. It's just a like
No, not,
exiting COVID, I suppose we could call it that, maybe. But it's been a fascinating journey in terms of re-engaging, finding different ways to re-engage that speak and can speak. It's also been interesting watching how our world around us wants to come back to re-engaging with church. I think what I'm learning anyway is that people want this. People want that love, and they want the space and place to talk about some of the more difficult aspects of feeling your feels and living in this world, and then also what that means in terms of relationship with the rest of the world, relationship with community. But they also are being pulled in hundreds of directions. So more flexible ways to access that is something that's really becoming very clear to me as we walk down this road. People are looking for it. They want it, but they're not necessarily going to like come to us in a physical building to get it.
Yeah, I had a real epiphany this morning in another meeting with the West Side Coalition for Housing, Hunger, and Health, whereas the board members were saying, who are all working in the agencies, that they don't see how we'll ever get together in the big meetings in person again, not because of disease, but because all of a sudden their time has gotten so much more filled.
Yes.
So the idea of coming over to Mount Olive for our mass meeting on a Thursday morning, which involves driving and preparation,
Mm-hmm.
when right now, right after that hour, they've got two more meetings. I
Yeah.
think we're going to be experiencing that in the church with our members in this post-COVID
Yeah.
era, more than we were before.
I think so. I think so. And I think there's, I think this is one of those places where not just Christianity, but faith in general has an opportunity to be countercultural and push back a little bit on this level of busyness. Um,
Yes,
there's nothing
yes,
wrong with busyness if we want to be busy, but I think there's a lack of mindfulness that has led us to this place where we think we need to maintain the same or more levels of productivity as we were doing pre-COVID, but it's not working as well because, as you said, that drive to a meeting doesn't work. So now we're doing it digitally so that we can pack more in.
right.
Got to be rest. There's got to be rest somewhere in there.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And Bishop and I were talking, Bishop Brenda and I were talking about the debate too about the legitimacy of online worship, which is a debate I'm not interested in having,
Same.
because it's with us, and I think again congregations that are going to be planning for the future are going to be doing both forever. And
Yeah.
pretty clear that when you're out in the congregation, you're going to be doing online worship in 3 years and regular worship.
Mhm.
Pretty clear.
It's going to be real. It is. And it's so fascinating too. I just, the digital tools are so important and they are so useful. And yet, simultaneously, just on a personal level, I had communion that was a lot more like the communion I grew up with just this past week at school. And it's the first time in a year and a half, I think. Wow, what a powerful moment.
Yeah,
Powerful moment. And that's very difficult to regenerate when you are not in the same physical space.
I think that's right. And as you know, I'm not interested in the debate about communion online either.
Right, right.
But
Right. Neither am I per se, but it is a like that reflection of,
but oh yeah, I think
you know?
so. How do we provide both in a quality that speaks to the people that can be there and want to be there, that still speaks to the
Mhm.
people that can't be there or find that enough,
Yeah.
and not judge either
Yeah. And I think
for
maybe
that?
the I think that's sort of, if you really want to get into what I think our Bible is telling us, it's that one way is no way.
Right.
It's many ways, and you just need to accept all of them.
Well, and even our Lutheran tradition, based on Martin Luther's writings, would support that. You know, if worship is truly valid when the word is properly preached and the sacraments are properly administered, now you could get off on a properly administered thing, but that gives you an awful lot of leeway
Yeah.
when you
If
think
our
about
God is a God of love who can also love our enemies, do we really need to be hung up on the properness of Eucharist?
it. Exactly right. And although the church has always been hung up on
That's
peripherals,
true.
as we
They've
know.
always been very hung up on Eucharist, but
In the 1890s, they debated candles. I mean, you know,
iconography, I mean, let's just tear it all
all
down,
those
you
things, all those things. That's right. Oh, gee, well, wonderful. So, are you going to do clinical pastoral education next summer? Do you think?
I am. I'm going to try to do it this summer. It's going to be an adventure, but we've started the application and I'm looking around for most likely sites, best possible sites. There's a lot of complication around this. It's not an easy process.
Right.
The application process is a thing unto itself. Finding a program is a thing unto itself. But then in addition to all of that, I either need to figure out how to pay rent on this place for a summer to keep my things here because
Yes.
you're basically moving into a CPE program before your semester's even over in a lot of cases. And then you're coming back from CPE after your semester has begun in a lot of cases. So there's really no time for packing and unpacking and moving, not moving. So that's one interesting aspect of the complications. And then the other interesting aspect, of course, is that I really, really wanted to do prison ministry. And I really wanted to get involved in a program that was going to work in a prison environment. But nobody is doing that right now, which breaks my heart because from what I know from people who I know who are in prison, this is a space that really could use the support right now. And they are also getting the very last dregs of any kind of support, particularly because of COVID. So these are people that are really, really suffering and could use it, but no one's going in there right now.
Well, we only had a handful of prison CPEs before COVID. I
Yeah.
mean, so yeah, you're right. We should tell our viewers what a CPE is. Clinical pastoral education, a requirement for graduation as a Lutheran pastor, a 3 month intensive, often in a hospital or a prison or a nursing home. And
This is very
either one of the highlights or lowlights for most seminarians.
true. So this is a program that is built around educating you on how to be with a person who is walking through a thing. And sometimes those are very tough things, sometimes those are not very tough things. Obviously, we're talking about prisons, hospitals, nursing homes, so you get the sense of what might be going on in those spaces, and that's what the programs are all about. And of course, it's the mix of learning how to be with a person and also teaching yourself where your own boundaries are and how you need to self-care through the process of helping and holding and walking with people in tough positions.
Exactly. Well, you and I, before we started recording, we're talking about the action reflection model, and I guess CPE is the ultimate example of that.
Yes, yes.
You're talking to a client in the prison or in the hospital, and then you're going back and writing a verbatim, and the next day you're going over it with your supervisor. That's really action reflection.
Yeah, yeah, big time. And even my work with San Francisco Night Ministry, because they have a massive CPE program that they work with, and it's just getting a little bit bigger each year. It's a beautiful, beautiful program, and you don't have to be somebody who's in seminary to do this. And what I'm finding and what we're seeing is that there's quite a few people who just want to do care. They want to know how to care for people and how to love people better in any form of service. And so they're getting willing to come into these spaces and learn these techniques and learn how to do this.
Wonderful. Oh, great. Great. Well, this has been great to have an update time with you. So, in the midst of all this, Sam, where do you Where are you finding hope these days? In the midst of seminary and COVID and in your own life, where do you find hope?
I think for me personally, I'm finding it in individual interactions. And especially because we're living in this really polarized political environment. I'm spending a lot of time reading about empire and how destructive it is, and Christ, the omnipresent uh, polar opposite of empire, um, systemic evils. Like it's pretty easy to start to feel yourself being crushed underneath the weight of the reality of the world we live in and the structures we live in, and how difficult it is to untangle even the tiniest bit of that. But all that said, but individual people are so good. They really are. It's really rare that somebody really is just truly nefarious. And my interactions and as I walk along, what I find more and more and more is that if I, as a human being, am willing to be the human being I really am, if I'm willing to embrace the realities of my own suffering, embrace the places where my brain is just giving me a tough time, embrace that, yes, there is pain all over the place. If I'm willing to be that honest and authentic, what I find is the rest of the world is also very willing to be that honest and authentic and
Yeah.
meet me right there. And there's a lot of love and there's a lot of joy in that, despite the destruction and the pain and etc etc. So it's kind of the two sides of that coin. You can't have the joy and the happiness if you're not willing to acknowledge the pain and the suffering. Like Barbara Brown Taylor says in An Altar to the World, if you want a very fast, no frills interaction with the holy, go for something that's painful.
No, it's true. It's true. And yeah, it's one of my other sayings. Anytime I go off in righteous indignation, I'm wrong.
Yes, exactly, exactly. It's like that's the very moment that you break relationship at that point.
Right, right. All of a sudden, well, and if we make people a thing, right?
Yeah, yeah,
And even the hard ones to get along with, if we can get underneath, we can say, "Oh my,
yeah. It's the
you know,
I thou versus the Buber's I thou versus
exactly, exactly,
what
yeah."
it means to whatever weird projection I need to put upon you today.
Well, I hope you can hold on to that,
I hope
and
so.
I know that at least for me, I don't hold on to it every day, but I try to hold on to it most days.
It turns out it's kind of hard to do, but I'm trying really hard to build a whole bunch of structures and unique ways to do things so that, for me at least, and I'm feeling really called towards building this into my ministry and building this into how I do ministry in hopes that it's not really just about me and how I do ministry, but it becomes the way that people interact with each other, or a way for me to like provide a pathway for people to realize this and maybe explore it on their own. I think we all know it on some
Yeah,
intuitive level, but to like put it into practice on a broader, more daily route is where I'm feeling pulled these days.
wonderful. Well, thank you, and thank you for taking the time to have an update. We'll do this again in a while and see how
We'll
we'll
see if I'm
track
still
you through
saying this
seminary.
after CPE.
Oh, that would be good. We'll do it after CPE, so our viewers can look forward to something next fall. All right, well, thank you so much. Our guest today on Hope Matters has been Sam LaDue, a second-year student at the Pacific Lutheran Theological Seminary in Berkeley, California, which is a seminary of California Lutheran University. And Sam is also a longtime member of Mount Olive Lutheran Church here in Santa Monica, and we are very proud of her as our seminarian and are enjoying ways we can support her in this work. So thank you, Sam, for being with us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
This has been Hope Matters, a production of Mount Olive Lutheran Church here in Santa Monica, California. We talk to interesting people each week because we believe that hope matters and we believe in a God of hope. Join us again next week as we talk to somebody interesting from around the world about the theme of hope.